She thought she was finally leaving. She thought that night would be the beginning of her freedom. Instead, it became the night she would lose everything. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. There are moments in life when a person looks around their home and realizes it no longer feels like a home at all. That was the space this mother found herself in on the evening of November 19, 2025, on Huss Street in Tiffin, Ohio. After months of domestic problems that police publicly described as ongoing but did not detail, she finally made the decision many people in dangerous relationships fear the most. She was leaving. It wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It wasn't supposed to be violent. It was supposed to be a quiet retrieval of belongings. One step in a long overdue move towards safety. She didn't go alone. She brought someone she trusted, 29-year-old Dustin Wiley, her older son's father. Dustin wasn't there to confront anyone. He wasn't there to escalate anything. He was simply doing what many good fathers and good friends do. He showed up to help. By that evening, he had already worked his regular job. He was tired but willing. The plan was simple. Get in, gather belongings, get out, and keep the children calm. The mother brought her 2 children, her 7-year-old son from a previous relationship, and her 7-month-old infant, the baby she shared with her husband, 42-year-old Ryan Egan. Police documents later confirmed the arrangement. The adults were inside packing. The children were outside near a vehicle. And at 6:24 p.m., someone in the neighborhood called 911. They reported gunfire. They reported screaming. But before the call, before the panic, before the sirens, there was a silence that no one realized would shatter. Inside the house, the mother and Dustin moved quickly but quietly. The tension of the moment, the urgency, hung in the air. Police later described her as trying to remove belongings amidst domestic issues, a phrase that is often the final line in far too many tragedy reports. The older child, a bright, tender 7-year-old known for leaving little love notes for his mother, had been helping earlier in the day. Friends and family later described him as protective of his baby brother and affectionate toward his mom. That night, he stepped outside with his baby sibling, maybe to get some air, maybe restless from all the movement, maybe because kids instinctively try to help however they can. The infant, bundled in his car seat, had no idea what danger looked like. He only recognized the familiar shapes of the people he loved. 7 months old, still small enough to cling to his mother's shirt, still young enough to think the world was soft. Outside, the night was cold and dark, the kind of November evening where the air feels thin and the neighborhood settles early. Porch lights dotted the street. A few televisions flickered behind curtains. Nothing appeared wrong. Not yet. Inside the house, as the adults gathered belongings, the older boy's scream split the silence. It wasn't a playful shout. It wasn't a sibling squabble. It was a cry that made the mother freeze. Police accounts later confirmed this moment exactly. The mother and Dustin heard the older child cry out, and when they ran outside, the danger was already standing in the driveway. Ryan Egan. His presence was unexpected. It was not his scheduled time to be at the house. Investigators later stated that there was no ongoing altercation inside the home before the shooting. Instead, the ambush happened outside, in the driveway where the children had been moments earlier. Multiple news outlets cited the police report the same way. Egan was spotted in the driveway, armed, and moving toward the car where the children were. In that instant, everything changed. The mother reached the doorway first. Dustin followed close behind. The driveway lights did little to illuminate the chaos, but what they could see was enough to send Dustin running. According to the Tiffin police chief, Egan immediately chased Dustin across the driveway. Dustin tried to run, but he was at a disadvantage. He wasn't armed. He wasn't expecting this. His only mission was to protect the mother and the 2 boys. Shots rang out. Neighbors would later say the sound came in bursts, sharp and terrifying. Dustin was hit. He fell to the ground. The mother screamed his name, but she didn't have time to reach him. She didn't have time to do anything before the gunfire continued. Egan turned toward the children. Police statements later confirmed the sequence. He shot the 7-year-old. Then he walked to the infant still strapped in the car seat. It was over in seconds. When emergency responders arrived, the infant and Egan were already dead. Dustin and the 7-year-old child were alive but gravely wounded. They were rushed to the hospital but later died. The mother, who witnessed the aftermath, who tried to reach her kids, who screamed for help in a situation no parent should ever face, survived physically, but officers described her as visibly traumatized and overwhelmed. She had done everything she could to protect her children by trying to leave. And in the most cruel twist imaginable, leaving was the moment her safety disappeared. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The scene that night was one that first responders would never forget. 3 victims with life-threatening injuries. A suspect dead from a self-inflicted gunshot. A mother collapsing against officers, screaming for her children. A quiet neighborhood erupting into chaos. Investigators from the local police department and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation cordoned off the entire street. Neighbors were ordered inside their homes. Detectives worked under floodlights for hours, marking every piece of evidence, documenting every shell casing, every trajectory. The mother was escorted away, trembling, unable to speak more than fragmented sentences. And in that moment, as officers began reconstructing the horrific sequence, one hard truth echoed among them. The danger had been waiting outside before anyone realized it was there. But the most haunting question of all, the one investigators would spend days trying to answer, was this: how long had he been waiting, and why that moment? Those questions would lead the investigation deeper into the family's history, into the domestic problems police referenced, and into the timeline leading up to the tragedy. Because what investigators discovered next changed the understanding of that night entirely. Not every tragedy has early warning signs. Not every volatile relationship shows bruises or police calls or the typical indicators the public expects. Sometimes the signs are quiet: tension, fatigue, fear, or the silent erosion of trust inside a home. Police did not release a detailed timeline of the relationship between the mother and 42-year-old Ryan Egan. But they did confirm one major, consistent fact: there had been ongoing domestic issues inside the home. In cases like this, the phrase domestic issues is often the only detail the public ever receives, partly because departments must protect victims' privacy and partly because domestic investigations often include sensitive information that cannot be released until after full review. But that phrase alone, paired with the outcome, paints a picture that investigators recognized immediately. It tells them someone had been trying to leave for a while, and leaving is statistically the most dangerous moment for victims of domestic violence. More dangerous than staying, more dangerous than arguing, and more dangerous than almost anything else. For this mother, November 19th, 2025, was the day she decided she couldn't stay any longer. The tragedy unfolded in the evening, but the investigation confirmed that the process of gathering belongings had begun earlier that day. Sources later described that she had arranged for Dustin Wiley, someone she trusted, to help her retrieve her things. To investigators, that detail mattered. It meant she wasn't planning an argument. She wasn't planning a confrontation. She wasn't meeting with her husband to talk things out. She was transitioning out. Every bag she packed, every item she removed from the home, was a step toward a life beyond conflict. The children, her 2 boys, followed along as kids do, curious, restless, unaware of the gravity of the moment. Dustin wasn't there for conflict. He wasn't there to provoke anything. He wasn't armed, aggressive, or confrontational. Police made that clear in their public statements. Everything about the adult's actions that day suggested caution, not escalation. Still, investigators would later find themselves asking the same brutal question: did someone know she was planning to leave? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. One of the most frustrating parts of the investigation was the lack of a fully known timeline for Ryan Egan in the hours before the shooting. Police did not publicly release his activities earlier that day, nor did they detail when he last communicated with anyone. This uncertainty left investigators with gaps they needed to fill. What they did know was this: he was not supposed to be at the house at the time the mother and Dustin were gathering items. There was no reported argument inside the home before the shooting. The shooting occurred outside, in the driveway the moment he appeared. He arrived armed. Those facts alone indicated planning, or at least intent. Investigators had to consider the possibility that Egan was aware she was retrieving belongings, or that he suspected she was leaving, or that he had been monitoring the house. But without formal statements or surviving witnesses who saw him arrive, those pieces remained speculation, and the police refused to speculate publicly. All they could say was that his arrival was sudden and deadly. While detectives focused on the timeline, the community learned about the children, the two young lives at the center of everything. Local coverage shared stories from family and friends. The 7-year-old boy loved writing small notes to his mother, little reminders that he loved her, that he noticed her. He had a habit of helping with small chores, like handing his mom bags or watching over his baby brother. The infant, just 7 months old, had favorite foods, orange-colored ones, and a lullaby that calmed him when nothing else would. These details emerged not from police reports, but from family posts shared with local media. They were the small, human details that remind the world these were not victims in a headline. They were children with routines, quirks, and futures. And investigators understood that too. Every homicide investigation is handled methodically, but crimes involving children leave a different kind of silence at a scene, a heavier one. On Huss Street that night, that silence was unmistakable. At 6:24 p.m., the first emergency call came in. The caller reported shots fired and screaming. Investigators later confirmed that multiple calls followed within seconds, each from neighbors who had heard or seen the chaos outside. The sound of gunfire in a quiet residential street creates an instant ripple of fear. People duck behind windows. Parents pull kids closer. Dogs bark. Lights turn on. But on that November evening, almost no neighbors saw the initial confrontation. The driveway where the shooting happened wasn't visible from every angle, and darkness had already settled over the street. Still, one detail stood out in call logs. Multiple callers described the sound of gunfire as rapid and continuous. That told investigators something important, even before they arrived. It told them the shooter never paused to argue, never paused to threaten, never paused at all. When the first officers arrived, the scene was chaotic. Police records described the situation as active, violent, and unstable. The first responders saw Dustin Wiley, gravely wounded in the driveway, the 7-year-old suffering life-threatening injuries, the infant still strapped into his car seat, already deceased, Ryan Egan, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, the mother in extreme shock and psychological distress. One of the officers later described the mother as struggling to breathe through panic. Another described her as in a state of collapse. None of this was released as official quotes in full statements, but multiple news outlets cited officers' descriptions of her being visibly traumatized and overwhelmed. For investigators, her survival meant something crucial. She was the only living witness to the moments before the shooting, but she had just watched the unimaginable. Interviewing her would take time. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. While the scene was being processed, detectives arranged to speak with the mother. They understood the urgency. Her memories were the only first-hand account they would ever have. But trauma distorts time. Trauma blurs details. Trauma makes the brain prioritize survival, not chronology. Detectives know this, so the interview was approached carefully, without pressure. What she revealed, what she remembered, helped detectives close some of the gaps in their timeline. She confirmed she and Dustin were inside packing. The children were outside near the vehicle. She heard her older child cry out. She saw Egan in the driveway when she and Dustin rushed outside. Dustin ran to intervene. The shooting began immediately. Her statement supported the police narrative released later. It was an ambush, not a fight, not an argument, not a confrontation gone wrong. An ambush, but there was something she said, something detectives later wrote into their notes, that became one of the most haunting and important clues of the entire case. something that suggested the tragedy may have been set into motion long before the first shot was fired. And it was a detail investigators could not ignore, because what the mother told investigators next changed the direction of the entire investigation. When detectives interviewed the mother, they were handling a witness in extreme psychological distress. They didn't expect a perfect timeline. They expected fragments, pieces of memory blurred by terror. But the information she provided, once she was able to speak coherent sentences, helped investigators confirm their initial theory of the crime. Her statements to police helped clarify the sequence of events that the physical evidence also supported. The critical facts that emerged were not about subtle sounds hours earlier, but about the nature of the ambush itself, confirming it was a targeted attack stemming from the domestic issues police consistently referenced. Until this point, detectives were processing the scene purely from the physical evidence starting at 6:24 p.m. But the mother's account, combined with the context of her trying to leave the home, suggested something far more disturbing than a random arrival. It pointed directly to premeditation and a targeted attack. This immediately changed how investigators approached the timeline of Ryan Egan's actions. While the mother received care, detectives returned to Huss Street. This time, they weren't just processing a crime scene, they were solidifying a timeline and a motive. They focused on confirming whether Egan arrived minutes before the shooting, or if he had planned his arrival to coincide with the family's presence. Officers canvassed houses, seeking anything that might reveal when Egan arrived. While specific details about a single, identifying piece of camera footage of Egan hours earlier were not released publicly by police, the investigators collectively gathered information that reinforced the official statement that the incident was not a random event. The lack of a confrontation inside the home before the shooting was a key piece of information. The mother confirmed they were inside packing and the children were outside near the car when the incident began. Egan's immediate use of a firearm upon his appearance supported the theory that he intended to use violence from the moment he arrived. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Detectives later spoke with the mother again to gather more details. Her statements were crucial in establishing that Egan's presence was both unexpected and hostile from the first second he was seen. She confirmed that as soon as she and Dustin Wiley ran outside after hearing the 7-year-old cry out, Egan was in the driveway and the violence started instantly. This confirmed the official characterization of the event as an ambush, not an argument gone wrong. Police did not publicly confirm if the mother had a nervous feeling or texted a friend about feeling watched earlier that day. However, her actions, bringing a trusted person, Dustin Wiley, to help her move out quietly while believing Egan was out of town, clearly demonstrated a high level of caution and concern about his reaction to her leaving. This context was vital for investigators to understand the dynamics of the domestic situation. While investigators combed through physical evidence, they turned to the difficult task of understanding the mindset of the shooter. There was no manifesto found, no clear explanation left behind. But the behavior provided its own terrible logic. His unexpected appearance at the home, the use of a firearm, the rapid escalation to extreme violence, the specific targeting of the stepsons and Dustin Wiley, the final act of self-inflicted death. This pattern is tragically familiar in extreme domestic violence cases, often referred to as domestic homicide-suicide. The goal appears to be total control and devastation rather than argument. Police publicly labeled it a homicide/suicide and a targeted attack, avoiding more clinical terms but conveying the specific intent behind the violence. The fact that the violence was aimed exclusively at his immediate family members and the man helping them underscored the personal and targeted nature of the tragedy. As is standard in major cases, detectives secured warrants for Egan's digital footprint, phone records, messages, calls, and online activities. They needed to find evidence of planning or motive. They were looking for answers to critical questions. How did he know they were moving belongings that evening? Had he been tracking their movements? Had he purchased the weapon recently or researched the act? Digital forensics take time, but the information gathered would eventually help form a complete picture of the hours and days leading up to November 19, 2025. One thing was already clear to investigators. Egan's arrival at the house was deliberate. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Forensic teams at the coroner's office carefully established the exact sequence of the shootings to understand the events that night. Their findings confirmed the sequence based on the mother's testimony and physical evidence. Dustin Wiley was chased and shot first. The 7-year-old child was then fatally shot. The 7-month-old infant was shot last. Egan then took his own life. These difficult findings provided a clear picture of the attack for investigators. As the community grieved, the Tiffin Police Department and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI, worked tirelessly to put the final pieces together. The evidence coalesced into a single, devastating conclusion. The violence was an intentional, planned act of domestic murder-suicide. The full timeline, once completed through digital forensics, would confirm the worst fears about how long he had been planning this. Because what detectives discovered when they finally accessed Ryan Egan's final digital search history confirmed the depth of his intent and revealed that the planning had begun long before the day of the shooting itself. The sun had barely risen over Tiffin, Ohio, when investigators returned to the house on Huss Street. The focus now shifted from immediate response to reconstruction, digital forensics, and community support. Detectives had a clearer picture that what had seemed sudden, a violent outburst, was now understood as a culmination of planning, officially characterized as a targeted attack. Forensic teams confirmed several key points. Egan's cell phone location information contributed to the understanding that his arrival was deliberate and premeditated. Call logs and messages showed no communication with the mother or Dustin Wiley that day, reinforcing the idea that the violence was planned rather than reactive. Ballistic evidence gathered at the scene matched the weapon found near Egan's body, confirming he was the shooter of all victims. The combination of physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and digital records allowed investigators to reconstruct the timeline. Egan arrived in the neighborhood. The ambush began when the children and adults were outside, and Egan immediately pursued Dustin Wiley, then targeted the children, before turning the weapon on himself. This reconstruction was critical not for sensationalism but to honor the victims' stories and clarify the exact nature of the tragedy. In the days following, the neighborhood began to grieve. Candlelight vigils were held on the block where the family had lived, and local media documented neighbors laying flowers, toys, and notes. The victims were officially identified as 29-year-old Dustin Wiley, 7-year-old Ren Wiley, and 7-month-old August Egan. Neighbors recalled Ren as curious, bright, and affectionate, known for leaving love notes for his mother. These small, human details brought a measure of light to an otherwise dark narrative. Local officials coordinated with domestic violence services to provide counseling for survivors and neighbors, highlighting the broader issue of domestic violence and the dangers of leaving abusive situations. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. By the end of the first week after the tragedy, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI, and Tiffin Police Department issued a preliminary statement. The shooting was domestic-related, confirming the earlier public release. Egan died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound at the scene. Dustin Wiley, Ren Wiley, and August Egan all died from gunshot injuries sustained at the property. The mother survived and was cooperating with investigators. Her identity was protected under Massey's law out of respect for her privacy and safety. Crucially, Tiffin Police Chief David Pauley confirmed that no law enforcement personnel discharged their firearms, and no officers were injured during the response. Investigators stressed that all victims were killed in rapid succession, characterizing the event as horrific and heartbreaking for all involved. For the mother, survival brought its own challenges. Physical safety did not erase the emotional trauma. She remained under observation at a local hospital in the immediate aftermath and later received counseling from domestic violence professionals. Community members described her resilience as quiet but profound. Her statements were instrumental in helping law enforcement understand the sequence of events, providing crucial information for the timeline. The Tiffin Police Department and Ohio BCI later offered public guidance about domestic violence awareness. Leaving an abusive relationship is statistically the most dangerous time for victims. Safety planning is critical, and professional resources, like the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE should be consulted. Reporting unusual or threatening behavior early can sometimes prevent escalation. Public statements emphasized that while the tragedy could not be undone, lessons learned could save lives in other situations. Even in grief, the community found ways to honor the victims. Fundraising efforts helped cover funeral costs and immediate support for the surviving mother. Candlelight vigils and small memorials marked the space where the tragedy occurred. Local news coverage highlighted the children's small joys, providing a counterbalance to the horror of their deaths. The story of November 19, 2025 is not just about violence. It is about ordinary lives intersecting with extraordinary tragedy. It is about children whose routines, quirks, and small joys made them beloved. It is about a mother whose instinct to survive and protect became both a shield and a witness. It is about a community forced to confront loss, resilience, and the limits of human control. The tragedy ended with 4 dead, 2 children, Ren and August, a young father, Dustin Wiley, and the perpetrator, Ryan Egan. But the narrative continues in the memory of the victims, in the work of law enforcement, and in the community that rallied to support a grieving mother. Investigators concluded, based on verified facts, the sequence of events unfolded rapidly but with clear signs of planning. The mother's observations were pivotal to reconstructing the timeline. The incident underscores the extreme risks of leaving abusive or volatile domestic situations. And finally, the story stands as a solemn reminder. Behind every headline, there are real lives, real grief, and real consequences. This is the full story of that night in Tiffin, Ohio, a night that changed lives forever. While justice in the legal sense could not be served due to the perpetrator's death, the pursuit of understanding, remembrance, and prevention continues. By remembering the victims, the 7-year-old boy Ren Wiley, the 7-month-old infant August Egan, Dustin Wiley, and the lives they touched, we honor them with the respect and humanity they deserve. And by sharing their story, we hope others recognize the warning signs, take action, and seek safety before it is too late. And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.